The world is being redesigned right now while you sleep, work, and scroll. Some people sense the shift and position themselves strategically for what comes next. Others wait for an announcement that will never arrive, believing stability will return on its own. Guess who wakes up in a world they understand versus a world that locked them out? Everyone believes the future is something that arrives later, something distant and predictable. What if I told you the future is being written this exact moment? Most people spend years waiting for clarity before they act or prepare. The system doesn't announce transitions, it simply stops rewarding old strategies while quietly favoring new ones. You're taught to think about change as something you'll notice when it happens clearly. But what separates people who adapt from people who get left behind? If transitions announce themselves with clear signals, everyone would adjust simultaneously and equally. Yet some people seem to navigate shifts effortlessly, while others struggle for decades. How does that gap emerge if information is equally available? Change doesn't wait for permission or comprehension. It accumulates through small decisions made by millions of individuals and institutions daily. Currency experiments expand quietly. Work arrangements shift gradually. Educational models test alternatives continuously. These aren't headlines. They're the actual substance of transformation happening beneath your awareness. If understanding how the future gets shaped while most people wait passively interests you, consider subscribing to Prof. Jung Explained. This channel examines structural transitions that operate below the noise of daily events. Share this with someone who senses things are different but can't articulate what changed. They need to see how timing determines who participates versus who spectates. The first mechanism is delayed perception. Systems don't collapse suddenly despite how it appears retrospectively. They erode gradually. Trust declines year by year. Purchasing power shrinks incrementally. Opportunities narrow slowly. By the time the change becomes undeniable, the foundation shifted years earlier. This delay is not accidental, it's structural. Human perception is optimized for immediate threats, not gradual trends. You notice a fire. You don't notice temperature dropping 1 degree annually. So the most consequential changes evade conscious detection until they're irreversible. Consider career paths. 20 years ago, certain degrees virtually guaranteed stable employment with predictable progression. Today, those same degrees produce uncertain outcomes. The change didn't happen overnight. It happened through thousands of small shifts. Automation displaced some roles, globalization redistributed others. Technology created new fields while eliminating traditional ones. But people were told the old path still worked, so they followed it, invested years, accumulated debt, then entered markets that no longer valued what they offered. The future was being written. They were preparing for the past, not because they were stupid, because they believed stability would persist. The second mechanism is institutional lag. The organizations that prepare you for the future were designed for the past. Schools teach what worked previously. Parents advise based on their experience. Media discusses what's already visible, but preparation requires anticipating what isn't visible yet. This creates a fundamental mismatch. You're being equipped for a game that's ending. Meanwhile, new rules are forming, new metrics of value, new sources of security, new forms of leverage. The people recognizing this early don't have better information. They have better questions. They ask what's changing, not just what changed. Think about how you learn to evaluate opportunity. Probably through institutional signals, prestigious credentials, established companies, recognized titles. These signals worked when institutions were stable, but when institutions destabilize, the signals become unreliable. You optimize for markers that no longer predict outcomes. The future being written now operates on different logic. It values adaptability over credentials, networks over hierarchies, experimentation over experience. These aren't better values morally, they're simply what the emerging structure rewards. People who recognize this shift their behavior, people who don't keep investing in deprecating assets. There's also the assumption that someone is steering the transition competently, that leaders understand the full picture, that experts have consensus, that institutions coordinate effectively. This assumption is comforting. It removes responsibility, but complex systems rarely transition smoothly under centralized guidance. Instead, transitions emerge chaotically. Different actors pursue conflicting objectives. Policies contradict each other. Innovations disrupt faster than regulation adapts. No single entity controls the trajectory. The future gets negotiated through countless uncoordinated decisions. Some people participate in that negotiation consciously. Most don't realize it's happening. This negotiation occurs in small choices. What skills you develop, what relationships you build, what narratives you believe, where you allocate attention. These micro decisions aggregate into macro patterns. The patterns become structures. The structures become the new normal. By the time it's normal, it's too late to position differently. Consider the shift to remote work. It wasn't planned centrally. It emerged through necessity during pandemic conditions. But once established, it revealed possibilities. Talent could be accessed globally. Offices became optional. Cities became less central. These realizations are reshaping everything. Real estate markets, urban planning, immigration patterns, family structures. The people who recognized this possibility early repositioned themselves, developed remote work skills, built location-independent income, relocated strategically. They didn't predict the pandemic. They simply noticed the pattern early and adapted. The future was being written. They participated. Others waited for things to return to normal. The third mechanism is narrative inertia. You're surrounded by stories about how the world works. These stories feel true because they're repeated constantly. Work hard and succeed. Credentials open doors. Institutions protect you. Progress is linear. These narratives organize previous eras effectively, but they become traps when conditions change. The new reality contradicts old narratives, but people cling to narratives anyway, because abandoning them feels like losing identity. If you built your life around certain assumptions, questioning those assumptions threatens your foundation, so you ignore contradictory evidence. Explain it away. Wait for confirmation of what you already believe. This creates dangerous blindness. While you wait for the old narrative to resume, the new structure solidifies around you. Opportunities close. Positions fill. Networks form. By the time you accept the change, you're entering late. Late entry means accepting others' terms rather than shaping your own. Think about how you evaluate risk. Probably through conventional frameworks. Stable job feels safe. Experimentation feels risky. But what if stability is the actual risk? When the stable option is tied to declining structures, it becomes gradually more dangerous. The experimentation, while uncertain, at least builds capacity for adaptation. The future being written rewards those who treat uncertainty as information rather than threat. Uncertainty signals transition. Transition creates opportunity, but only if you engage rather than wait. Waiting for certainty means missing the moment when positioning matters most. There's also the problem of distributed agency. You think major decisions are made elsewhere. Governments negotiate. Corporations strategize. Markets allocate. And you're just responding. But systems are aggregates. Your consumption patterns influence what gets produced. Your attention determines what gets amplified. Your career choices signal what skills are valued. The future isn't being written by a small group in closed rooms. It's being written by millions of daily decisions, including yours. Whether you realize your participation is irrelevant to the outcome. You're contributing either consciously or unconsciously. The question is, which one? Some people ask, what can one person do against massive forces? The premise misunderstands how massive forces form. They emerge from accumulated individual behaviors. Cultural norms shift through conversation. Markets move through purchasing. Institutions change through participation or withdrawal. No single action determines outcomes, but patterns of action absolutely do. Consider technological adoption. New platforms emerge constantly. Most fail. Some succeed. Success depends on adoption patterns. Early adopters experiment, create content, build networks, develop expertise. Later adopters find established ecosystems. They join on others' terms. The platform is the same, but positioning within it is completely different. This dynamic applies beyond technology. New industries, new regions, new skill sets, new frameworks. Early engagement means shaping rather than inheriting. Late engagement means adapting to what others shaped. The difference is timing, and timing depends on awareness that change is happening now, not later. The fourth mechanism is comfort addiction. Familiar feels safe even when it's declining. Unfamiliar feels dangerous even when it's emerging. This bias toward the known is deeply embedded. It protected ancestors from genuine threats, but in transitional periods it becomes liability. It keeps you invested in what's fading. Look at your daily routines. How much is habit versus choice? How much is comfort versus strategy? Routines that worked in stable conditions can become traps in transitional conditions. They consume time that could build new capacity. They reinforce old patterns when new patterns are forming. Breaking comfort requires recognizing that discomfort is feedback, not failure. When old approaches stop working smoothly, that's information. It means conditions changed. Most people interpret this as personal inadequacy. They try harder at what's not working. They don't question whether the approach itself became obsolete. The future being written favors people who update their strategies based on feedback, who treat setbacks as data, who experiment iteratively. These aren't personality traits, they're learnable behaviors. But learning requires accepting that what you knew might no longer apply. There's also the illusion of later. You tell yourself you'll adapt when necessary, when things get really bad, when change becomes undeniable. But by that point, adaptation becomes reaction. Reaction happens under pressure. It's desperate, not strategic. The people who position themselves earlier aren't smarter. They just recognize that later arrives suddenly. Think about retirement planning. Young people delay because retirement feels distant. Then suddenly they're middle-aged with insufficient savings. The future arrived. It just didn't announce itself. The same dynamic applies to skills, relationships, location, everything. The time to adapt is before the pressure, not during it. Another factor is social proof. You look around at what others are doing. If everyone is following the same path, it feels validated. But what if everyone is optimizing for a game that's ending? Collective behavior provides comfort, not necessarily wisdom, especially during transitions when the majority hasn't recognized the shift yet. The people positioning for the future often look strange initially. They make choices that don't fit conventional logic. They invest in skills that seem unnecessary. They relocate to places that seem random. They build networks in emerging fields. From inside the old paradigm, this looks like poor judgment. From inside the new paradigm, it looks like foresight. The challenge is that you can't know with certainty which paradigm will dominate. That's why it's called transition. Multiple possibilities compete. Some will succeed, others will fail. But waiting for certainty guarantees you miss the moment when positioning matters most. Some uncertainty is the cost of early participation. The fifth mechanism is metric fixation. You're taught to measure progress through specific metrics: salary, title, square footage, credentials. These metrics organize the previous era. They made success legible. But what if the new era operates on different metrics entirely? What if the measures you're optimizing for are becoming irrelevant? Consider influence. Previously, it flowed through institutional positions. Now it flows through networks and platforms. The person with the title isn't necessarily the person with the reach. The person with the reach often lacks traditional credentials. The metric changed, but many people still optimize for titles or consider security. Previously, it came from stable employment with established organizations. Now it increasingly comes from diversified income streams and portable skills. The employment feels more secure subjectively, but objectively it's often more fragile. The metric changed, but perception lags. The future being written rewards people who identify emerging metrics early, who recognize what the new structure values before it's obvious. This isn't mystical, it's observation. You watch what behaviors are actually being rewarded, not what narratives say should be rewarded. Then you adjust. What cannot be emphasized enough is that this isn't about predicting one specific future. It's about building capacity to navigate uncertainty. The future will contain surprises no one anticipated. Rigid preparation for one scenario fails when reality diverges. Flexible capacity adapts across scenarios. This means developing skills that transfer across contexts, building relationships across different networks, maintaining financial buffers, cultivating emotional resilience. These aren't specific to any particular future. They're generally useful in transitional periods. They're what allows participation regardless of which specific pathway emerges. Some people treat this as paranoia or anxiety, but it's actually the opposite. Anxiety comes from sensing change but feeling powerless. Agency comes from recognizing change and engaging strategically. The future is being written. You can contribute or spectate. Both are choices. Neither is wrong, but they produce different outcomes. The real tragedy is not that change happens. Change always happens. The tragedy is people who had capacity to adapt but waited too long, who had information but didn't act, who had options but chose comfort, then find themselves in circumstances they don't understand, unable to navigate effectively. You stand in a brief window where positioning still matters, where choices still influence outcomes, where adaptation is still possible before solidification. This window will close, not dramatically, just gradually, until one day you'll notice that the new normal doesn't include you the way you expected. The future isn't delayed. It's not something arriving later after more signs. It's being written in small decisions happening continuously. Currency experiments, work arrangements, educational models, relationship structures, all of it shifting incrementally. The people participating in those shifts are shaping what comes next. The people waiting for clarity are inheriting what others shaped. This isn't call to panic. Panic is counterproductive. This is invitation to awareness. To recognize that your assumptions about timing might be wrong, that later might actually be now, that the stability you're waiting to return might not return at all, that the future you imagine arriving with announcement is actually forming quietly beneath your feet. Understanding this changes everything, not because it gives you perfect answers, but because it makes you look differently at your skills, your relationships, your location, your investments, your attention, and you start asking better questions, not is this comfortable, But is this positioned for what's emerging? Not is this traditional, but is this adaptive? The future is being written, with or without you, by people who recognize the transition early, or by people who wait until it's obvious. Either way, it's being written. The only question is whether you participate in the writing or read what others wrote after it's complete.